Arsenal had a damn good year last season, pushing Manchester City almost all the way in the title race. That means that, of course, Arsenal fans have lofty ambitions for the season ahead, but where should their goals be? I take a look at some of the advantages of Arsenal this season, where they might see some drawbacks, and ultimately what Arsenal fans can realistically set as goals for the season ahead. First of all, we need to talk about last season. It was an incredible one for the Gunners, who'd recently slumped quite a bit and hadn't sort of pushed their way into European football contention. Now, a hell of a lot of that came from Odegaard and Saka playing out of their skin, with Gabriel Martinelli contributing from the left, and a nice solid midfield foundation. Now, ideally you want to build from that and make sure that the club is in the best possible position to take advantage of all the opportunities that the foundation of last season has given them. And that's where their important incoming signings make a difference, with 4 of them potentially being part of the first team. The main one is Declan Rice. There was a massive bidding war going on for him, with West Ham really not wanting to sell, although they sort of had to, and eventually doing so for £100 million. Now, I think this is an excellent get for Arsenal. In central defensive midfield, having lost Xhaka, they sort of needed someone with a little bit of oomph that can also progress the ball, and that's where Declan Rice comes in. Not only that, but he adds some more depth to the squad, which is an absolute must with the Champions League coming up. However, a similar player that plays sort of CDM and can slot in at centre-back, being Jurrien Timber, is a completely new problem for Arsenal. They spent a hell of a lot of money on him, but now he's injured and unable to play for the club, potentially for months on end, so they need to get another player in, otherwise they risk having even more lack of depth at the back of the pitch, which can just expose them to the better teams. The other 2 players the side picked up were David Raya from Brentford, which I think is an excellent get. He's one of the best Premier League goalkeepers at the moment, so if Aaron Ramsdale slips up a little bit, it's not Matt Turner taking over, which is a big boost, and it's someone that can play the cup matches, maybe a bit of the Champions League, just to take a little bit of the onus off Ramsdale. Aside from that, there's also Kai Havertz, who's going to come in as a sort of hybrid number 8 that can play in an attacking role. With Gabriel Jesus' ability to be constantly injured though, there's a bit of a risk that he might end up being forced into centre forward again. And that brings us on to the first key struggle that Arsenal could face. A lot of injuries just sort of plaguing the squad. Gabriel Jesus has missed a hell of a lot of football, and that leaves you with Folarin Balogun or Eddie Nketiah as your centre forward. Arsenal tried to sell both or one of these earlier in the window, it's quite hard to tell, but clearly they don't want them to be the number 1 centre forward. And you've also got injury issues further back in the squad. Jurrien Timber getting injured already is a big problem, and we'll need another incoming just to sort of plug that gap up. That adds up to the next issue that they have to deal with, and that's the Champions League. The Champions League is one of the most prestigious competitions in the world, and you need a deep squad, because you're doing an incredibly difficult Premier League campaign alongside the Champions League, the League Cup, the FA Cup, etc, etc, etc. None of those are things that you want to give up if you're Arsenal right now, because Arsenal desperately want the trophy. By competing in the Champions League, you sort of threaten the integrity of your squad, and you need to buy a little bit more depth. Admittedly, that's what Havertz could bring, that's what Trossard brought last season, that's what Declan Rice brings, but there could be a little bit more, I reckon. And then you've got issue number 3 that Arsenal are facing. Last season Arsenal did so well partially because they were really good, but partially because teams that are normally around them were really bad. Liverpool had a distinctly poor season, although Newcastle did rise up, they didn't quite challenge Arsenal. Chelsea were dreadful, and Spurs were not very good. Now, all of those teams have improved somewhat over the summer, perhaps more than Arsenal, and that means that it's going to be a fight to stay in that top 2. It's a very, very difficult Premier League this season, especially with Chelsea throwing about money the way they are, and I think Mikel Arteta is going to need to be smart in order to compete in the way that he did last year. So where does that leave Arsenal? After a dominant performance against Nottingham Forest, there's a lot of optimism to be had in the squad, but I think the ideal goal for an Arsenal fan at the moment is top 4. It's an obscenely strong Premier League up at the top at the minute, whilst the bottom looks a little bit poor with the likes of Luton and Sheffield United. It's insanely competitive where Arsenal are looking. Anyway, let me know what you think in the comments below, like the video if you enjoyed, and subscribe. See you later.